Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. Despite the fact it seems like it's a long way away, it's really not that far. It's just a day on a plane. A big change of pace here. I'm going to be talking about some experimental work, or online experimental work as opposed to lab experimental work. So this is a paper about learning to value annuities, so looking at annuities versus flexible drawdown products. And this is joint with a number of colleagues based in the Netherlands. So this particular project was funded by CEPAR, where I'm associated with, Centre of Excellence in Population Ageing Research at UNSW, and NetSPAR. And when we started this project, 3 of us were in Australia, but I'm the only one left. And so the joke is that I'll be in the Netherlands soon. Okay. So why are we interested in annuities? And we had a nice talk from Olivia yesterday afternoon about retirement benefits. So around the world, as we know, we see a greater emphasis on defined contribution. It's often framed as moving from DB to DC, but Australia never really had DB, so that's not our motivation. Our motivation is that we have a DC system, and we have a DC system where we have choice of benefits. But we also see around the world, as Olivia was talking about yesterday, that some DB systems are now considering greater flexibility. So we've always assumed that DB was all about lifetime pensions. But as we saw in Olivia's talk yesterday, you know, there's a suggestion that even US Social Security could provide you with a lump sum. In Australia, this is a really important issue, thinking about retirement benefits. I'm assuming that you know a little bit about the Australian system. In the accumulation phase, we have compulsory participation and a compulsory minimum contribution rate, and then defaults to help you get through, so default, asset allocation, etc. But once you reach retirement, we have choice of benefit. And there's basically 3 things people can do. They can take an annuity, they can take a lump sum, and they can take a phased withdrawal product that we call an account-based pension. And I've just got some charts here showing what people do. So in lump sums, most people take some lump sum. The average lump sum is about $25,000, around here, $10,000 to $25,000. Most people take an allocated pension or an account-based pension, which is a phased withdrawal product. Very few people take life annuities. So I've got a chart here showing what people do, and really life annuity is so small you don't even see it here. So in Australia, this is the life annuity market. It's never been very big. You know, so this is like half $500 million in life annuities. Going back here, about 8 or 9 years ago, only about 100 life annuities were sold a year. These days it's a little bit more. These days it's 3,000 or 4,000 sold a year at retirement. So our life annuity market is just about non-existent. But this is why we're interested in retirement benefits. And in the Netherlands, at the time we started this project, which was 3 or 4 years ago, there was a policy intention in Australia to try and increase annuitisation. It's gone very quiet lately, but what the government wanted to do was to encourage all pension funds to have a life product on their menu, on their product menu. And this was the idea that this was going to be a soft default. So if it was on the menu, then people would be encouraged to take it. The government's gone very quiet on this, and they're sort of changing their policy a bit, and what they're doing now is designing some financial product disclosure rules on retirement benefits, which are actually quite horrible. So I won't go any further. So anyway, the Australian policy intention is to try and increase annuitisation. They're not really clear how they're going to do it. And in the Netherlands, at the time we started this project, Dutch pension reform seems to have been dragging on forever. But at the time we started the project, there was some idea that in the Netherlands, people would be given some flexibility in their retirement benefits. So at the moment in the DB schemes, everyone's getting life annuity type products. And the idea was perhaps there can be some flexibility, and the Dutch will be given a small lump sum as well as their retirement benefit. And I'm not sure if that's completely off the agenda because, like in Australia, I can't keep up with what's happening with pension reform in the Netherlands.
They're fighting now the discount rate, so that topic is on a side. There is a fight around the discount rate.
Yeah. There's always a fight. That's yeah.
Discussion.
So, what does the literature tell us? Well, we know that life cycle models suggest that there's large utility gains from lifetime annuities, but we see low observed demand. There's lots of explanations for that. So on the demand side, there's rational reasons why people don't annuitise, there's behavioural reasons. In Australia, there's supply side reasons. In fact, there's only one active company selling life annuities. So the life insurance companies have just left the market. And they're concerned about the risks that they'll face. And there's also regulatory reasons. So in Australia until recently, there were tax and means test social security penalties, I guess, for taking your retirement savings as a life annuity. On the demand side literature, there's all sorts of behavioural reasons that have been found to explain low interest in life annuities. So defaults, so if the annuity is a default, people take it. If the annuity is not, they don't. Heuristics, framing, so the products may be framed in such a way that they're not attractive for people. They're framed in an investment frame, which makes them look like a really bad deal rather than the consumption frame. Julie Agnew has some nice work on gain and loss framing, an endowment effect, financial competence, financial literacy. Olivia has a couple of nice papers with Jeff Brown looking at trying to explain the gap between willingness to pay and willingness to accept on the basis of complexity and choice bracketing. So there's a whole range of literature here.
So what's your take on the Taylor Benanzi argument that there's actually not low observed demand when you look at those who have a choice to do this? Familiar with that argument?
There's not low...
There's actually not low demand when you normalise it appropriately. If you're not familiar, we don't need to worry about it.
Okay. I probably am, but I'm focused on
Not
getting through my
go,
paper right now. Now I've lost my train of thought. Okay, so some of these papers are asking people whether they'd be interested in these products or whether they perceive these products to be good deals. Other papers, particularly the Jeff Brown and Olivia papers, are asking people to value annuities versus flexible account products. And what we want to do in our paper is actually both. So we do two things. We ask people how they perceive these products, but we also then ask people to value these products. And we want to find out if there's a difference. If some things are actually driving people's interest in the products, but if other factors are actually getting people to the door and saying, yes, these are a good deal, I'm going to buy them. Because that's really what's important in the real world, people actually getting to the door and buying the product. And so we designed some experiments, and we're sort of doing the kitchen sink. So we're putting in a lot of the ideas from the previous literature. So we're looking at the role of information framing, and so we're framing these products in terms of consumption, investment and losses and gains. We're looking at the impact of people's financial capabilities, so their financial literacy, their numeracy skills, and also their self-assessed financial literacy. We're looking at the endowment effect. We also include a lot of demographics. And importantly, because we're doing this as Dutch and Australians, we're setting our study in both the Netherlands and Australia. And they have different institutional settings, and we want to try and understand whether that is affecting people's decisions in the experiment. So the fact I'm in Australia and I'm used to a system where I don't even know what an annuity is, they're not sold, no one knows what they are, whereas I'm in the Netherlands and I'm getting a lifetime index pension from my defined benefit scheme, so does that matter? And if you look at Australia and the Netherlands, despite that difference, there's a lot of similarities between our pension systems. So we both have a first pillar. Australia is means tested, the Dutch isn't. Australian non-means tested pays about 27% of average earnings, the Dutch pays 30%. We both have a mandatory second pillar which covers 90 to 95% of workers. In Australia it's DC and we have choice of benefit, and it's Dutch it's DB and they don't have choice of benefit. So the Dutch are taking lifetime pensions. Australia are mainly taking phased withdrawal products where they have a lot of flexibility but they don't have longevity insurance. Neither of us cover the self-employed, and we both have tax preferred systems for voluntary saving. So we're reasonably similar in structure, but we differ in the type of benefits that people get. So how do we address our research question? With what we call an experimental survey. So this is an online survey, and it's conducted online rather than in a lab. So we ran surveys in Australia and the Netherlands, exactly the same survey, except translated into Dutch, then back to English and back to Dutch to make sure that we were asking the same things in the same language. Interestingly, I've emphasised this, that the Dutch saw the survey in Dutch. Recently had a paper where we conducted a survey in China, and obviously we translated into Chinese, but our referee was really upset that he thought that the survey was in China in English and was worried that we were going to get in a certain demographic. So I thought I'd emphasise that the survey to the Dutch was in Dutch. We had about 1,000 Australians in Dutch. We used a web panel company, Survey Sampling International, which has panels in both Australia and the Netherlands. We wanted to survey people for whom this was a relevant choice, but they actually hadn't made the decision yet. So we looked at people aged 50 to 64, where at least one person in the household was still employed. And the survey, we designed the survey to last about 25 minutes. The average time it took was 30 minutes. I think the Australians took 31 minutes and the Dutch 29 minutes on average. They were paid a fixed amount for participation, and then we had a quiz in the survey where we tested knowledge of the products we introduced, and you could earn up to another $2.50 Australian, or whatever that is in euros. It's probably more in less in euros than it used to be, or no, more in euros than it used to be, but anyway. So the survey structure, people came into the survey and there were screening questions to make sure that they were eligible. So they had to be of a certain age. We wanted 50-50 gender. We wanted someone in the household to still be employed. And we also screened on household income because we wanted a distribution of people in this survey. So we really had 4 groups, like 4 quartiles of income, and we tried to get people in each quartile. Then in our experimental task, we had certain parts of it which were between subjects, so often, obviously, country, marital status. So in the task, we actually asked people to buy annuities, and we want to price those depending on whether people were single or a couple, and if they were a couple, the annuity had 2/3 reversion to a surviving spouse. We had 4 versions based on income, because we're giving people amounts and asking them to do things, and we wanted to make sure that the income we gave them, or the amounts we gave them in the survey, were reasonably close to their own circumstances. We had 4 information framing treatments where we framed information about the products in consumption gain, consumption loss, investment gain, investment loss. We did some willingness to pay, we framed people in terms of product endowment, so people either were randomly assigned to willingness to pay or willingness to accept multiple choice price list. And then within subjects, people did 6 choice tasks which differed by the benchmark allocation to annuity, and that will be clearer as I go on.
Just a clarification, you were July, and as we know, December was when same-sex marriages were recognised federally in Australia. Did you limit things there, or what did you do? The Dutch, of course.
Oh, we weren't asking if they were married, we were asking about household, and so
okay.
We just, you know, are you married or partnered? That's our question,
right.
so
right.
we weren't.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
And
it does
then-
have some implications for what contracts you can sign, of course.
And then covariate collection, obviously with our own survey we can collect a lot of things, but it's sort of restricted because we don't want the survey to last for more than 25 minutes. But we asked a lot of questions about demographics, risk preference, time preference, financial literacy questions, personality questions and health status questions, subjective life expectancy. So when people got to the experimental task, we made people work really hard in this survey. I think some of them hated us at the end, but some didn't. Mainly the Dutch hated us because we kept asking them to make decisions between annuities and flexible drawdown products. And we got comments at the end, in the open-ended comments, saying, why are you making us think about all these things that are not relevant? Whereas the Australians were saying, thank you very much for teaching me about something I need to know about.
So the 1,003 in the Dutch, they were people who completed, or people who did you sample 50,000 and got 1,000? What was the?
Okay,
Because
they were
out.
completions, and so with the commercial web panel company, we asked for a sample of so many completions.
Oh, so they don't tell you the people who dropped out on the way? Because we find there's a lot around the world that you ask these long-winded things, and a whole bunch of people who say, screw it, I'm not interested.
The attrition rate's not that huge, actually. So it's probably 75% of people who start finish.
Oh.
But we pay for 1,000 finishes. So we have.
Yeah, I know, but your statistical
Yeah.
analysis should take into account that certain people on certain attributes will drop out. That's the point. I mean, so I don't
So we had 1,000 finishing. Okay, so what did people do? Firstly, they came into the survey and we gave them some very brief information about the products. And this about two products. One that was an annuity that we called a guaranteed lifetime income product because we didn't want to give a product name. And the other we called a flexible drawdown product, which is like a phased withdrawal product. And they came in and we gave them very brief information about what this product was, and that was framed. And then we gave them some detailed information about what the products were, which were neutral. And following that, we quizzed them, and it was an incentivised product quiz. They told that they were going to be paid based on the number of correct answers. And then we had some questions asking them about their perceptions of these products. Do you understand the different products? Do you think that these products are risky? Do you think that these products will give you control over your retirement savings? Because we thought understanding risk and control was important to understanding the difference between an annuity and a flexible drawdown product. Because an annuity will cover you for risk, and a flexible drawdown product will give you control. So if people understood that, they should understand the products. And then we had 6 choice tasks to elicit the value of the annuity product relative to the drawdown product. And then we asked a question about the likelihood of actually exchanging one product for the other following their choice on the multiple price lists. And so, for example, this is the introductory information. So if you're in the consumption gain treatment, your guaranteed lifetime income product would be described like that, and your flexible product would be described like that. And we change these descriptions depending on whether you were single or a couple. If you're a couple, we talked about you and your partner. If you were single, we just talked about you. And then following that, we gave people neutral information about the product, more detailed information. So they first came in and they got some framed information, and then we gave them some detailed information about both of the products. And we had a timer on this page to force people to look at it, and hopefully they didn't sort of switch off and do their emails and waited for 30 seconds to go. But we told them that following that information, they'd get a quiz and they'd be rewarded on the number of correct answers. And so the sorts of information we were giving people here about the products: how long do the payments last? What happens if I or my partner die? What happens if we both die? What happens if the price of things I buy increase? So what happens if there's inflation? What happens if there's fluctuations in financial markets? So how does this product address investment risk? What happens if I live longer than expected? How does this product address longevity risk? And we told them this information about the annuity, the lifetime guaranteed income product, and the flexible account product. And then we gave them a quiz. Oops. Yes, so we gave them a quiz, and when they answered the quiz, so I've answered this quiz saying yes for everything for lifetime income product, and I've actually got 3 of them wrong. And so I find out what I've got wrong, and then I get told how much I'm getting paid. Interestingly, when we looked at the results, and just so I don't forget, so Australians who you think should be familiar with a flexible account product, the question they most often got wrong was that they could, that the money left in the flexible account product could be inherited. And the Dutch, who you'd think would know about lifetime guaranteed income products, the question they mostly got wrong was that a lifetime income product shouldn't fluctuate with financial markets. And so, you know, we think Australians know about their product and the Dutch know about their product, but actually they're making mistakes with their own products as well as the product they're not familiar with. Okay, and then I guess this is one of the key questions. So following being given all this information, we then asked both the Dutch and the Australians questions about how they perceive these two products. And the questions we asked were on a scale of 0 to 10, what's your understanding of a life annuity? What's your understanding of a flexible drawdown product? And then we asked them, how risky do you think a life annuity is? How risky do you think a flexible account product is? How much control do you think you'll have with a life annuity? How much control do you think you'll have with a flexible account product? And you know, if we wanted to know whether people understood one product more than the other, whether people thought one product was more risky than the other, and whether people thought they'd have more control with one product than the other. Following that, I said we're driving people crazy here. We then asked them to undertake some choice tasks to elicit the valuation of an annuity versus a flexible account product. So people were randomly assigned to willingness to pay and willingness to accept questions. And we elicited this using iterative multiple price lists. And so we went through and we gave them an example, several pages of the screen. We explained to them exactly what we wanted them to do. And then people were given 6 different choice sets which were randomised. And these choice sets differed by the benchmark portfolio allocations that people had for the 2 different portfolios in the price list. To help them undertake this part of the experiment, we decided to provide them with a calculator. And I'll show you a little bit how the calculator helped them. After we finished the experiment and after we implemented the experiment and we had all the data and we started analysing it, one of the things we realised that we should have done was to have a treatment where we didn't give people the calculator. We ended up giving everybody the calculator. So if we do something extra, we'll do a treatment without the calculator to see that if that affects what people did. And the way that the information was collected, we can't identify what people actually did with the calculator. So, okay. So this is the page that people got online. So they started off, they were repeated some general information about the product, which was framed information. And we really wanted to see here whether framing mattered to people's valuation of annuities. That was one of the key things we were looking for. So we repeated the framed information. People were in 4 different information frames. And then we explained to them what we wanted to do. And here we have our multiple price list where we have option A, which is a combination of a flexible account and a lifetime guaranteed income product. Option B, and what we wanted them to do was to go down and click the first row that they preferred, B to A. And what these are baskets of flexible account and lifetime income. And to help them make this decision, we gave them a calculator. And in the calculator, they could change some of the features of a flexible account. And so they could actually change the age at which a flexible account might pay, because that's going to affect the annual income that you'll get from it. whether they wanted to keep some amount from the flexible account for a bequest, whether they wanted to spend more in the first part of retirement than in the second part of retirement, which is what our Dutch friends wanted, because they're very keen in these low, high, high, low annuity payouts, and whether they wanted to increase the rate of return of the portfolio in which the flexible account is invested. And so we allowed them to play about with that, and then they confirmed their choice, and then, okay, so this is what the calculator looked like. They could play about with the calculator. And then I haven't shown it here, I don't have a slide, but once they'd chosen, they then went to another screen that had 4 more choices, which were choices between here, rows 2 and 3. And again, they could use the calculator, and then they confirmed, this is my choice, and went on to the next choice set. So they did that 6 times for 6 different benchmark portfolios. And importantly for our analysis, the choice they made here was directly mapped into an annuity money's worth. And so from the choice they made here, we could identify the money's worth that they were attributing to the annuity product. Okay. And then following that, we then asked them, what's the likelihood you'll actually do this? And so, for example, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is unlikely, 10 is likely, how likely is it that you would reduce your guaranteed income by a certain amount to receive an additional amount in your flexible account? After that, we then bombarded them with covariate questions. So I think we had very patient 2003 participants who went through this. Okay, I normally don't do this. I normally absolutely never do this, but I noticed yesterday and this morning everyone was putting up pages with heaps of econometrics, so I thought, yes, I've got to look respectable here. We did 2 sets of regressions. So one set of regressions we were looking at perceptions, people's perceptions of an annuity product versus a flexible account product. In the second set of regressions, we were looking at how people valued an annuity versus an account, flexible account product. And variables of interest here were the institutional settings, whether I'm Australian or Dutch. Does that actually affect how I perceive these products? The information framing, the 4 frames. My financial capabilities, and we have self-assessed financial literacy questions, the big 3, some numeracy questions, and then a whole range of covariates that we asked as well. One of the things, we also created a variable, I guess explain. What we wanted to do was to get some idea of whether people had actually paid attention and read all this information we gave them. Because we gave them framed information, we gave them neutral information, we asked them to use a calculator. And so what we wanted to do was to try and identify people in our survey, given that we didn't have sort of a separate treatment on the calculator, we wanted to try and identify people in the survey who we think probably hadn't engaged very much, so probably hadn't read the information. And so we defined a group that we call less engaged. So in the econometrics you'll see interacted with low. And these were people who made 3 or more mistakes in the product recall quiz. So that's 3, there were 5 questions. So if you got 3, 4 or 5 incorrect, you were less engaged. And were within the 10% fastest survey completions. So the average time was 30 minutes, but some people took 10, 11, 12 minutes. And we identified these people as low, and under the assumption that they weren't paying attention, they probably hadn't read the information. Okay, so what did we find about perception? Well, what we found about perception was that people tended to understand and be familiar with the products from their institutional background. So Australians, I guess a positive side here means I understand an annuity more than an account-based pension. Australians understood account-based pensions more than annuities. A positive sign here means that an annuity is less risky than an account-based pension. And Australians seem to think that annuities are more risky than account-based pensions. And a positive sign here tells me a negative sign here tells me that I have less control with an annuity than a flexible account, and Australians did get that. So the institutional setting that people were in were really important in eliciting people's perceptions of these products. What also was important was framing, but framing was really only important for the Dutch. Framing wasn't significant at all for the Australian sample. And also important was financial literacy. So people who did well in the financial literacy questions and the annuity questions understood the insurance features of the two products. So they understood that a life annuity was less risky than an account-based pension, but they understood that an account-based pension would give me more control over my spending than an annuity. And so they're all highly significant. The fact that you've got financial capabilities is helping you understand the insurance features of those
Maybe we'll
products.
come back to it later, but it's not at all obvious to me that the word control is clear, is unambiguously interpreted here. Because frankly, the one that, if I'm running out of money and I'm living to be 150, I ain't got no control over anything, I'm stuffed. Whereas if I know I've got money until I drop dead, I've got control until it. So to me, it's not, I'm just saying.
It was, it was explained in the survey what we meant by control.
Okay, I need to look at how you say it.
Because it does sound ambiguous.
Sure.
So, I mean, in these surveys, we try where we can to, if something's going to be ambiguous, we try.
Here's what we mean by the word control.
Okay. So, I guess looking at perceptions, what we found was institutional setting was important, framing influenced the Dutch, and financial capabilities helped you understand the products. So just turning to valuation. So, as one may expect, on average, people valued a life annuity or the guaranteed product at its actuarial value, but there was a very wide range in people's valuation of annuities. Of lifetime guaranteed income products is what we called these products. And again, I don't often do this, but what I've got here are just some summary statistics for different subpopulations of the entire sample. And so basically we found a difference between people who weren't engaged and people who were engaged. So people who weren't paying much attention and who were paying attention. So Australians who were engaged valued annuities less than the Dutch. Females valued annuities less than males. Couples less than singles, and a lot of this will be to do with the pricing, because with couples we're pricing an annuity that's got 2/3 reversion to the surviving spouse. As with the previous literature, as in Olivia and Jeff Brown's papers, we found that people in the willingness to pay treatment valued annuities less than in the willingness to accept treatment. For people who were engaged with our survey, who probably read that information, did well in the product knowledge quiz, used the calculator. For people who did that, that gap was smaller. But again, it would be nice for us to run another treatment to see whether people were using the calculator to help them understand multiple price lists. Okay. And we found that framing really wasn't important. So while framing was important in helping people develop perceptions about products, the framing didn't seem important here when people actually had to value the products. Okay, and so of course, so that was summary statistics, just doing some econometrics where we can control on a whole heap of things. We found that once we controlled for everything, the institutional setting dropped out. So it didn't matter whether you were Dutch or Australian. What really mattered was whether you were engaged with the survey. Looking at the endowment effect, again we saw product endowment was important, so people in the willingness to pay treatment valued annuities less than the willingness to accept treatment. And this was less for those people who were engaged. So the people who weren't engaged, who we assume didn't pay much attention to the information we gave them, the gap was greater. If we look at information framing, framing wasn't important at all. So again, framing's important to help people understand products, but if you want people to value products, framing was no longer important. If we looked at financial literacy, again, the financial capabilities were not important for the engaged, but they seemed to us to help the less engaged understand the products or value the products. And finally, on our major controls, the way we design the multiple price lists, we had 6 different levels of liquidity, and we could see how people valued annuities as you went from a portfolio that had full annuitisation to partial annuitisation to full flexible accounts. And it seemed that Australians valued annuities more if they were allowed to have some liquidity, whereas the Dutch were not willing to exchange liquidity for annuity products. Sorry, and the other way around. They weren't willing to exchange a flexible account for an annuity. Some of the other covariates, we found that Australians with high income valued annuities higher. Dutch who didn't own a house valued annuities higher. People with a saving habit valued annuities higher. Dutch with patients valued annuities higher, more, and singles did. That should be homeowners. So Dutch homeowners had a lower value for annuities, possibly because they are retiring with a mortgage and they want to pay it off and they want a flexible account. And people with self-assessed planning, high self-assessed planning knowledge, Australians with high self-assessed planning knowledge also had a lower value for the lifetime guaranteed income product or the annuity. Other covariates were insignificant, so people's self-assessed health status and also their subjective life expectancy were insignificant.
Risk attitudes, however you measured them, have no effect on this?
They didn't. They didn't. We measured them using the Doman question.
Well, there you go. And time preferences had no
I
effect
say,
on this?
and time preferences, no.
How'd you do that? Did you do that? There's
No.
like Likert scale thing again?
We did the Likert thing scale. I mean, I guess one of the things
It's all right, I just like...
in a 25-minute survey, yeah, we have to make this.
No, I get it, I get it.
We don't want to completely kill people, and we felt as though we already had with everything that we'd asked them. So what did we find here? We found if you ask people about their perception of the product, people's understanding of the insurance features of the products, but not will you buy the product. Things that are important are the institutional framework where they come from, their financial capabilities, and also framing. And framing seemed to be important to the Dutch. It seemed to help the Dutch understand the products. But when we asked people to value the annuity, a lot of these things dropped out. So it didn't, framing wasn't important, the country they came from, so that the things they bring into the experiment or what they know about their own system wasn't important. And financial competence, financial skills weren't important except for the people with low engagement. So people with low engagement, financial skills help them with evaluation. What we're sort of drawing out of this is what we did in our study was provide people with lots of opportunities to learn about the product. So we gave them a little bit of information, we gave them a lot of information, and we quizzed them, and then we gave them a calculator to help them understand and make the decisions in the valuation tasks. So what we're drawing from here is that you really need to help people through this process when it comes to the decision. So you can do things such as framing to get people interested, but to actually get people to make the decision and buy these products, you've got to help them a lot along the way. Provide them with information. We've given them a quiz to reinforce learning of that information, and then give them a calculator so they can actually understand the implications of choosing one basket of products against the other. And I think, unusually for me, I've got 17 seconds in hand. So thank you.
All right, so thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this paper to discuss. It was really, really interesting. I think we know, at least since yesterday evening, since the keynote, that this is really an important subject to see how people value flexible drawdown products or lump sums and annuities. So I actually need my pointer, I guess. All right. So, right. So I won't repeat much what the paper does. I think that Hazel really lined that out really well in her discussion, in her presentation. I'm gonna. So the study is about how people perceive and value annuities versus flexible drawdown products, and then when in a setting where they have a lot of opportunity to learn about these products. So their main finding is that in a setting with multiple learning opportunities, the gap between willingness to accept and willingness to pay is lower than what has been previously found. Now, the next point, so I'm highlighting what I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. The framing effects are overall really not very important. So they are a bit more important for subgroups, for the Dutch, and for the less engaged respondents, but overall not very prominent. So if people favor the product they know. I guess this is a sort of a familiarity bias. People are more comfortable with the products they already know from their own setting. And so the information provision, now Hazel already showed this, so this is a bit, you know this one already. This is the retirement calculator that they provided to people in the survey. And I think that this really has a lot of potential, and as Hazel mentioned, the potential would have been exploited a bit more had there been a control group. But I do think that this is a really cool tool because people learn better in an interactive environment where they can try out different options and see how that translates into income streams, because we know from a lot of papers that people do have a big problem with translating lump sums into streams of income. And we all know it's not easy, right? So giving them a tool like this is probably really, really helpful in getting them, making them familiar with these products and aiding their decision. And I think that this is really, really important also because, as Glenn mentioned before, like just nudging everyone towards a certain decision, like saying everyone should annuitize more, or that's not obvious that is a good approach. So my guess is that a tool like this is helpful in aiding people's decision that is in line with what they actually want. So I find this is really a cool, a nice tool. It's just important that we know how people would decide without the tool. I do think that the fact that you control for whether or not people were engaged helps a bit in remedying the lack of a control group. Like at least we know that people who are less engaged, so who probably make less use of this tool, have a lower understanding of those products, so that helps a bit. But since we have no control group for this, I would even go as far as questioning the title, because I'm not sure how much we can actually say here about how much people learn. We know how much people know after using the retirement calculator, but and how they decide, but we can't really say anything about the delta. All right, so and about the framing effects. So there is some previous literature on framing effects in annuities, and at first it was surprising to see that in this paper that uses two standard framing dimensions that have been used before, so consumption versus investment and gain versus losses, and framing effects would not be very prominent here. But I picked out two papers where I will quickly describe how they did the framing, and then I'm going to come back to how framing was done in this paper to show why, actually after careful reading, I wasn't that surprised to not find framing effects. There is a paper by Brown and colleagues in the AR from 2008, and they compared an annuity and a lump sum. And in their thinking, showing, for example, a bond that always provides the same risk-free rate might be perceived actually as less risky than buying an annuity, because for an annuity you get a higher sum than if you had a bond if you're alive, but you get nothing if you die. So in a sense, what you get from the annuity is more variable than what you get from a risk-free bond. So they, like building on that intuition, they say, well, if we frame the annuity as an investment, like we emphasize things like return and account balances, and people will like realize that this is actually, or this seems to be a risky investment, and they're gonna shy away from that. So they contrasted the investment frame with a consumption frame, where it was more about how much can you pay for, what's going to be your standard of living if you have that annuity. So they were more focusing on what happens if you're actually alive, and in that case, obviously, an annuity is better. So they show that annuitization is indeed less attractive under the investment frame. Now, one more example from Bashir et al. In the Journal of Public Economics from 2014. They also do an investment frame. So let's say with that one for now. Building on Brown et al., they do a very similar thing. They talk about how if you buy an annuity, you get a lot if you survive, but nothing if you die, whereas with a bond, you get the same thing no matter what. They had another one, and that's why I picked out this study. They also have the flexibility and control treatment, where they said that choosing a bigger lump sum gives you more control and more flexibility. Now, as Glenn actually rightly pointed out, it's like it depends a bit on your point of view, but this is how they presented it to survey respondents. And they find that both those frames, as expected, would induce less annuitization. But if we look at how framing is done in this survey, it actually quite differs a lot from what we've seen before. The annuity in the consumption gain frame means that people have more certainty about lifelong income, and in the consumption loss, they have less flexibility for unexpected expenses. But that is always coupled with a symmetric description of the flexible account product. So when you're in the consumption gain product frame, you are told about the annuity, you have more certainty, and with a flexible account product, you have more certainty, and with a flexible account product, you have more flexibility. So in the consumption loss, it's essentially the inverse. So for the annuity, you have less flexibility, and for the flexible account product, you have the risk of running out of money. So the same is true for investment gain. The annuity is said to have, so this is the investment frame. Remember that before usually the annuity was supposed to be riskier in the investment frame. But actually here in the investment frame, the annuity is said to deliver guaranteed return, and also the possibility of getting more if you live long. So in the investment frame, the annuity actually doesn't seem risky anymore. It's a different way of framing things. It's essentially just symmetric. Like before, usually in those frames, each frame would favor one product, and then people would often take the product that was obviously favored by the description. I'm actually not even taking a stand here on which framing I think makes more sense right now. I'm just pointing out, like, I wouldn't be surprised to find no framing effects, because your approach to framing differs quite a lot. What I would do, I'm not sure, I know that I had a slightly outdated version, so I'm not sure if this is in the paper now, but I would be more explicit about what I would actually expect from the framing that I use. So you're just saying, well, we're doing consumption versus investment frame, and people before have found that, but there needs to be, like, you have to look at the wording of the frame, then see, okay, what would I expect from this framing? And it would help also with the readability of the paper if there were like hypotheses that are then tested, so that first there is some economic theoretical foundation for what is done, and it's going to help to move along through the paper, because as you said, like you're using a lot of stuff from the previous literature, you're testing for a lot of things. It's a really super comprehensive and really rich paper, yeah, structuring it with hypotheses that are tested would help. There are other things, for example, institutional differences. I think that is a really neat feature of the paper that I would make a lot more prominent. So it might even move up into the title, because this is really something that hasn't been done before. I think this is really interesting, especially because you have those different populations that have very different experiences. That's really helpful. One last thing, I would talk a lot more about perception and valuation, how those two are related, because right now you're doing a lot of things on perception, and then you just something on valuation, and it's actually surprising that some things impact perception but not valuation. It would just be interesting to see what you expect from how risky a product is perceived, or how flexible, how that should impact the valuation, because there should be some sort of link. So yeah, I've run out of time, so thank you.
Okay, the comments are very well received. Thank you.
I think just a general thing about framing results. One of the things that concerns me a little bit about this, and there's a constructive suggestion at the end, is that very often what framing does is it represents the lottery to people. In other words, when you frame it a certain way, I pay attention to some aspect of the lottery rather than another aspect of the lottery. And I'll premise my next comment on the fact that I can't find any rigorous evidence for utility loss aversion. I'll just say that. I've got papers to support it. Let's just accept that. So lambda, and a lot of other studies that are doing it rigorously, find lambda is close to 1. Having said that, framing can still have an impact by causing me to perceive the lotteries differently. So the question I would ask then is, and this is also raised because there's litigation going on in the US when people choose nudges that are knowingly framing people in one direction or the other, why not give them both the loss and the gain frame? They're actually logically consistent statements. And and I'm not saying redo the paper, you can't do that, but I'm just saying in future when we're doing framing, it would be really interesting, the control to me that would be interesting is where you have both all of the loss frame lines and all of the gain frame lines, because they are saying logically consistent things, and then the question is, let the person decide. It's a bit like very often these days when you say to someone, here's why you should buy this product, here's why maybe you shouldn't. In other words, so you have this sense in which people still have an element of choice here, rather than a feeling, oh, they're just presenting one side of it or the other side of it. So it's just a suggestion for people doing framing stuff that, and I keep hearing the hand waving, oh, utility loss aversion's been proven. Well, that's just not true. But I still think there is something with framing, but the question is, it's got to do with risk perception, and that can be studied, it seems to me, in a more balanced way.
Yeah.
So I'd support more funding for you.
And